Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, Why hast thou made me thus? Romans 9, verse 20. Perhaps it is my fate as a semi-contrarian to have struggled with this verse during my theological training. The usual angle for this verse, perhaps rightly so, is for this verse to be discussed in conjunction with predestination and free will. The Apostle Paul is in the middle of a lengthy argument on the topic, after all, so that is fair. But we see this principle of human rebellion being displayed in other levels of society. This is only what we would expect. As Paul says in the previous chapter, quote, "The carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be." Romans 8, verse 8. Sinful people rebel against God and against the order that he has set in the world in all sorts of ways, from lying to theft and from immorality to murder. Some of these rebels are subtle, and some are markedly less subtle. It is common for modern people to be disappointed with their physical appearance. While it is true some, perhaps most, of our physical appearance is up to us at some level, this does not feel to be the case. We can, if so inclined, lose weight or gain it, but the inclination tends to feel impossible to find for those who need it. Some change to one's looks is neutral. The exact length of one's locks is not exactly biblically prescribed. Generalities are suggested. This does not mean that extremities are the norm. But there are darker aspects to change. What is more substantial to one's appearance than body modification? One could make the argument that the Bible does not propose anything on this. This would be wrong. The Old Covenant's physical sign was circumcision, which is definitely body modification. We are no longer under this covenant, and to use this as a sign of loyalty to that old covenant is strongly condemned. See Galatians 5:12, where Paul suggests further bodily modification for those who attempt to convince others of this heretical doctrine. One of the prophets also practices a form of body modification for his prophetic warning. Further, Jesus himself suggests that negative bodily modification is preferable to eternal punishment for continued unrepentant behavior. And finally, Jesus speaks of those made sterile by men, and neither condemns the practice or those who do it. But the converse could also be argued. We are made in the image of God. God commanded the Israelites against tattooing themselves or cutting themselves. In the New Testament, we are called to avoid sexual immorality on the grounds that our bodies are not our own, but rather temples for the Holy Spirit, and many would assume this would apply to body modification. From this biblical information, I cannot conclude that the Bible universally condemns body modification, but rather maintains a sense of caution. In each case where the Bible presents willing body modification in a positive light, it is directly associated with one's personal salvation or an act of direct obedience to God's stated will. When not done for that reason, it is presented at best in a neutral way, but sometimes in a sharply negative light. One could argue, as many have done in the subtopic of the morality of tattoos, that the prohibition against the Israelites tattooing themselves was given because of the incorrect spiritual association with Canaanite worship practices. They further argue that tattoos, and perhaps by extension any body modifications, are acceptable so long as they are not in direct connection with a spiritual/cultural force directly aligned against God. This is not an esoteric argument. This was written in the month of June 2022, the time when the West celebrates all sorts of dissipation and exalts wickedness as a virtue. And of all these wickednesses, the alliance of evil is currently promoting the altering of children's bodies to partially simulate the other gender. There is immense pressure to conform, to call good evil and evil good. People have been ostracized for this. People have been fired for this. People will, if this current course continues, no doubt be killed for refusing to back down in this good fight against madness. There is to be no argument. There can be no argument. As it is written, "The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God." If God finds a man merely putting on a woman's clothes an abomination, if God finds a woman putting on men's clothes detestable, how could anyone argue that body modification is acceptable to God? Why does the trans person demand physical editing? At some level, it is a rage against the reality that God has ordained, saying, "Why have you made me thus?" But God does not stoop to answer this question. And to paraphrase the argument, the apostle says, "Who are you, O man, to answer back to God?"